Hi, I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast, the week starting Sunday, November 21st.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, real data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see remnants of a small gale that was in the North Pacific, generating maybe 28-foot seas, aimed mainly east at northern Canada, but maybe a little bit of energy is going to push down into California. And development, or the beginnings of a new gale on the dateline with 28-foot seas expected to grow a bit more and actually have some potential to produce legitimate surf, maybe 4 or 5 days out. So we're moving towards a better place than we've been. Let's get into the details. Oh, what happened here? As usual, we'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when they form, help direct their track. The jet is pushing off Japan, and you see right here it's forming a trough, and what that helps do is create a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean's surface, and that is the hallmark of low pressure. And low pressure, of course, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, generate seas, and seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we have a little trough here that's supportive of gale development in the northwestern Gulf, and that is to push east and into North Canada on Monday sometime. But notice another trough is starting to build on the dateline at that same time, and a little bit stronger with winds in the 150, let's go back a little. It's almost, there we go, 160 knots pushing down into it. That gets good fetch over here in the western and the southern quadrant of the gale. That's really what we want, to be able to generate stronger winds aimed at Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. So another gale possible on Tuesday, moving into the western Gulf on Wednesday, and then fading out. And then also notice winds start building here at 170 knots, pushing off of Japan and continuing almost to 190 knots on like late Thursday into Friday, developing another gale here in the western Gulf, and that is to push east into Sunday, and almost a new gale starting on Monday, at least from looking at the upper level winds. So a much better pattern is in play right now than has been for weeks. We'll take it. Next up, let's go take a look down at the surface. Surface level pressure and surface level winds. And here we are, 18Z on Sunday, a legitimate storm. Tiny area, you see the purple in there? 55 knot winds building on the dateline aimed off to the east. That's a good deal. And as we move into Sunday night and Monday, the gale continues with 45 knot winds over the central dateline, almost 50 knot winds, then slowly fading, but then rebuilding again on as we get into Tuesday over a broad area in the Gulf of Alaska into Wednesday morning before finally fading. And then another weak low pressure system tries to organize in the Gulf. Unknown what will really happen here. Maybe some 30, 35 knot winds possible. Another potential for generating swell. And yet another gale trying to organize. Well, it's not really a gale, more of a low pressure system, but then filling out pretty nicely as we get into a week out on Sunday. So more potential in the forecast. Let's go look at the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. Here we are, significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. We see, as of now, this is going back to Friday night, a tiny little gale organized here in the, we'll call it the northern Gulf, and most of the fetch was aimed off to the northeast, not so much at the east. 20-foot seas, building, sort of back build into a little area of 29.9 feet. This is the highest seas over this whole domain. So right there, barely in the California swell window, maybe some swell to result from that. But then that gets us to where we are now, 18Z on Sunday. Looking forward, this gale supposed to build with seas in the 34-foot range, to about 36 foot, mainly aimed off to the east, but some sideband energy down at Hawaii and pretty close in proximity, up to supposedly 39 feet on later on Monday, about midday Monday, before this gale fades a little bit, but then tries to redevelop with still seas in the 25-foot range, aim well at the Hawaiian Islands and a bit at the U.S. West Coast, kind of away from the coast from California, so maybe not great swell generation potential. We know another low is to form here in the Gulf, but not with a whole lot of fetch, but still 18-foot seas, 19-foot seas, so we'll say wind swell bordering on almost ground swell possible for California. This is as of Saturday night. And then that is Saturday a week from now. And then another gale forecast building in the Gulf behind that. So an improving pattern for sure. Next up, we take a look at surface level pressure and surface level winds near the coast. We're mainly looking for the potential for weather relative to Hawaii and or wind swell. And as we see on Sunday, a light north wind pattern, high pressure right here, pushing almost basically northeast winds down over the central California coast. It was offshore here in the San Francisco Bay Area all day today. And relatively light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Monday, pretty much the same sort of thing, though trades building a little bit for Hawaii into the 15-knot range. And then as we get into Tuesday, a new high pressure builds in. Stronger, more northwest angled winds build over the coast, 20 to 25 knots as we get into the evening, almost 30 knots in Northern California. And trades continue for the Hawaiian Islands. You notice low pressure building in the Gulf of Alaska. Well, Tuesday night, 30-knot winds, but then when we get into Wednesday, the wind pattern quickly fades as the low tries to take over the high here and just sort of knock the legs out of it. Light trades continue for the Hawaiian Islands, so maybe some wind swell on Tuesday for California, but that's about it. So you get into Thursday, much lighter wind regime sets up, high pressure building into the coast, more nice weather continuing as we get into Friday, and then even into Saturday and Sunday, and just basically a weak high pressure pattern for California and light trades for the Hawaiian Islands for the foreseeable future. Not a bad setup with continued weak to moderate gales pushing through the jet stream to the north. Precipitation potential, we're looking at California with high pressure off the coast. That pretty much says it all. We'll look here, maybe just a little bit of a hint maybe of precipitation on Tuesday for Cape Mendocino, and that is it. Everything is focused from, it's really, we'd like to say even Washington, but it's really from the Washington border into British Columbia northward. And again, laser focused on, we'll say, Whistler and points north of there, and really even north of that. The jet stream just focused into British Columbia and even more not the south end of British Columbia. So looking at snow potential for Squaw Valley or Olympic Valley or anywhere south of there, just not a prayer, not even any rain really for California. Snow levels or the freezing level, 12,500 feet today, maybe dropping down on, was that Tuesday, to 7,000 feet for a minute, and then right back up to the 12,000 foot range, but basically holding for the foreseeable future. So high pressure appears to be in control. Let's take a look long term. What's going on with the Madden Julian Oscillation and, of course, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So as usual, we're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation. There's two phases to it, active and inactive phases. When the active phase is on one side of the planet, the inactive phase is on the other side. We want the active phase to be over the Pacific Ocean because when it is over the Pacific, what it does is it can dampen trade winds. It imparts energy to the jet stream, and a stronger jet stream, of course, helps generate storms. What it also can do is reverse trade winds where the active phase is, and the active and inactive phase rotate around the planet on the equator from west to east. So as the active phase makes its way across the Pacific from west to east, it dampens trade winds, and that in turn can take warm water that's typically in the far west Pacific Ocean and can help move it towards the East Pacific, and that's exactly what we want. So we start by looking at winds on the equator in the Pacific. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific here. The arrows are 5-day average wind speeds from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino, but also pretty handy in being able to determine the strength of the MJO. So looking at the arrows, pretty strong easterly winds in the East Pacific, pretty strong easterly winds over the Central Pacific, pretty strong easterly winds over the West Pacific. We call this the Kelvin wave generation area. 180, that's the date line. The equator's right there. Okay, it's this area from the date line, actually 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator over to the far West Pacific. When the active phase moves over this region and versus trade winds, it can take warm water that's typically here, push it off the east, and this is where it does all its magic in terms of feeding energy to the jet stream. But it's not the actual wind speeds, it's the anomalies, the differences from normal for this time of year. We see the arrows pretty just wandering around willy-nilly here over in the East Pacific. So pretty much normal winds here. In the Central Pacific, trades a little bit stronger than normal out of the east. And in the Kelvin wave generation area, definitely stronger out of the east, all indicative of the inactive phase of the MJO. And of course, the inactive phase does not really feed the jet stream a whole lot. Next up, looking at winds for the next week. All right, this is the whole planet on one chart. The date line runs right up the middle. So this is like the West Pacific area. The far West Pacific starts at 135 east, so right about here. And then Ecuador, the far East Pacific, is about 80 west, so right about there. Kelvin wave generation area, roughly in this area right here. So this is 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies, the east-west component of the wind, all right? The purples, blues are stronger than normal easterly winds. The reds, stronger than normal westerly winds. So you go, well, this is the active phase of the MJO, and this is the inactive phase of the MJO. You look and go, they're not moving at all. They're locked in place. Well, La Nina acts like a long-running inactive phase of the MJO over the Pacific. And so that's what you see in control here for the moment. And this long-running, what looks like the active phase over the maritime continent, that Bali, that area, this is really where the low-pressure bias, the part of the atmosphere that we really want over the Pacific, it's locked over here. This is a classic La Nina kind of signature. Low-pressure bias in the Indian Ocean, high pressure over the Pacific, and that really does nothing for supporting storm development in the Pacific. Looking 2 weeks out, this is outgoing long-wave radiation, fancy words for cloud cover. So here is South America, Central America, Hawaii, equator, EQ, right there. Okay, there's New Guinea, dateline right there. West Pacific, the area we're really interested in, right here. The blues are areas cloudier than normal conditions, typically associated with the active phase of the MJO. Yellows, the inactive phase. So right now, kind of a neutral pattern with the active phase over the maritime continent. Forecast, according to this, the statistic model, pushing into the far West Pacific 6 to 10 days from now, and then building over the far West Pacific 2 weeks out. Now, the dynamic model, not nearly as encouraging, suggesting the active phase just withering over the maritime continent and gone 2 weeks from now. And we tend to agree more with the dynamic model here, the GEFS model, than the statistic model here. Statistic model looks great, but the track record has been in favor of the dynamic model, so not particularly encouraging there. Next up, phase diagrams, a more detailed look at where the active phase is and how strong it is and what its forecast is. So, whole planet here, the active phase moves from the Indian Ocean to the east over the maritime continent, Bali, that area, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. It rotates round and round. The heavy dot right there is where the active phase is. So, maritime continent, just barely pushing out of the Indian Ocean over the maritime continent. The further the dot is out here, out towards the edges of the chart, the stronger the active phase is. The more it's in here, the weaker it is. So a very weak active phase, and then here's three potential paths for the active phase over the next 2 weeks, all of them putting it in the far west Pacific. One run says pretty, we'll say modestly strong. The other two say exceedingly weak. Then here's the dynamic model, the GEFS model. It says same thing, moving into the far west Pacific and quite weak indeed. So not what we want to see. We really want to see the forecast track somewhere up in here, and we're nowhere close to that. Looking out even further, 40 days. This is upper level, I guess they call it harmonics. Areas favorable for precipitation. So South America, Central America, New Guinea, the date line's roughly there. 0 is the equator, so right along there. Okay, Kelvin wave generation area, the magic area right here. Where the greens are areas for favorable for precipitation. So a weak active phase, inactive phase moving over Central America towards the Atlantic. You can see 5 days from now on the 26th of November, very weak active phase, slowly making its way across the Pacific, pushing into Central America, Ecuador on about the 18th of December. After that, the inactive phase, this oranges are areas not favorable for precipitation, moving across the Pacific and into over the Central Pacific, we'll say by the 31st of December. So if there was ever a window for storm production, it's somewhere between now and the next week or two. After that, not looking so good. And then we go out a month. This is the 30-day CFS forecast, all right? 180, that's the date line there. Far West Pacific there. Kelvin wave generation area right in here. That's what we're interested in. The blues, easterly anomalies, not favorable for storm protection. The reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase of the MJO, favorable for storm production. So you can see back September, this was the solid contour is the active phase of the MJO. It moved through the Pacific over the Kelvin wave generation area, which starts about there to about there, over from September and about October. It takes about a month, and that's pretty typical. Followed by and you notice westerly anomalies. Then the inactive phase, a very weak one, strong, the blues, easterly anomalies, strong easterly anomalies, and that is over now, supposedly, but easterly anomalies still forecast into about the 22nd of November, then they finally fade out altogether. But even after that, easterly anomalies persist the whole way into at least the end of the model run, 18th of December, while westerly anomalies typically associated with the active phase of the MJO, and there's the active phase, forecast developing weekly over the maritime continent in late November and early December, but almost making no headway into the West Pacific. So we'll get into a little bit more of that with the next chart. All right, so here's the 3-month CFS model. Same deal, whole planet one chart, date line runs right up the middle of the chart. Far east, or West Pacific starts here about 135 east and goes, and the Kelvin wave generation area ends at 170 west. And this is past performance here. Look at the dates. The forecast is here. So we're interested in this box that starts like here, something like that roughly. The blues, easterly anomalies. So we see strong easterly anomalies, but you get the general sense that those easterly anomalies are to push slowly off to the east, while westerly anomalies, which are strong over the maritime continent, are supposed to slowly and weakly build their way and, well, if the date line's right there, pretty much filling the Kelvin wave generation area by February, if you believe the model, okay? Let's overlay the MJO here. All right, so here is that active phase that happened back in October and ended in early November. The dotted contour, this is the inactive phase that we're currently in, and that's supposed to be out of the Kelvin wave generation area by about the end of November. We'll say November 29th. Then after that, this sort of mixed bag of supposed active phase trying to build in, trying to push these easterly anomalies off to the east, and also ushering in westerly anomalies. Now, here's the kicker. The model suggested that this active phase right here was supposed to be like at least that strong, if not more, 3 months ago. And now that it's time for it to actually happen, it's all but nothing, which means the model's grossly overhyped the strength of these active phases, and so not particularly reliable. What is going on? Well, the low pass filter here. All right. So this just sort of says generally where is high pressure and low pressure, and is there some sort of locked pattern going on? And as you can see here, this dotted contour, high pressure bias. Here's the date line, locked right over the date line with 2 contour lines. Last week it was only 2. This week now it's showing 3 contour lines, so bulletproof high pressure over the date line, and if anything, building while slowly moving off to the east as we get later into January and February with the low pressure bias, the El Nino signature locked over the maritime continent, maybe trying to ease east a little bit and making it halfway. So that's, if I go down there roughly, that's about 150 east. So that's about halfway, maybe 40% of the way through the Kelvin wave generation area. If you believe the model had earlier hyped this building much quicker, much sooner. We would say at this point, this is all nonsense. None of it's going to happen. High pressure is going to stay locked over the Pacific pretty much the entirety of winter, and maybe not till sometime in the late spring will we see a change. So this is probably 2 months earlier than what really could possibly happen. Again, that's just guessing based on the performance of this model and all the other models. This La Nina pattern is persistent, it's here for 2 years, and it's not easily going to be dislodged. All right, so let's go take a look down in the ocean. That's another, we've been talking about the atmosphere and the MJO and all that, but there's other things going on that we need to discuss. So this is subsurface temperatures in the Pacific on the equator. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific here. We're just looking for absolute temperatures. Again, data from the TAO buoy array, that series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These X's, see those little X's? Those are sensors on the anchor lines of the TAO buoy array. Notice there should be something about at 140 or 145. There's nothing there. And now in the far East Pacific, all these sensors are out as well. They're here and they're here, but there's nothing here. So anything that this data is relayed to a central processing facility, and they use a model to fill in the gaps. So anything sort of here in the East Pacific is highly suspect, at least using just the TAO buoy data. Anyway, warm temperatures, this is centigrade, 29 degree isotherm at 163 east. That's about where it was last week. The 24 degree isotherm locked as it was last week at 180 west, not moving at all. The 24 degree isotherm at 133 west. That's where it's been, even though this is a little suspect. That's probably about right. But it's not the actual, and this is like a 5-day mean temperature. It's not real-time means. But it basically gives you a sense of where the warm water is and where it is not. But it is not the absolute temperatures. It is the anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Okay, we see 2 degree above normal centigrade temperatures here in the West Pacific. And we have pretty good coverage here of sensor data. So we say, yeah, there's warm water balled up here in the West. Now, there was a big pool of cool water, at least according to this, that was centered right over this rack of sensors here. And according to this, it's all but gone now, 1 degree. We think it is actually dissipating some, but this is probably a gross overstatement. There is another model that uses other data, and here it is. This probably is a little bit, it's about a week behind, but probably more accurately depicts what's going on. You see warm water at depth down 150 meters, that'd be what, about 450 feet, trying to push off to the east, being held at bay, though, by this giant pool of cooler than normal water here in the East Pacific. This is the typical La Nina signature. If you get stronger than normal trades here, which they have been blowing for a year plus, year and a half now over the East Pacific, that creates upwelling, colder than normal water. Above colder than normal water, if it's drawing up to the surface, you get high pressure. It takes warm water and evaporation to create low pressure at the ocean surface, what we desperately want over in the East Pacific. But at this point, subsurface-wise, we see no sense that that's happening. Next, sea surface, sea level anomalies. I call it sea surface height. But, okay, what are we looking at? Chile, Peru, that's all South America. Central America right here. Baja right there. California right up there. Hawaii right there. This is the equator. That is the date line. We see minus 15. What is that? Minus 15 degrees? No, that's minus 15 centimeters. This is satellite-based data. You strip out the ocean waves, strip out wind waves, strip out even the tides, and we're looking at the sphere of the ocean. Is it higher or lower than normal? Why is that? Well, why would it be lower than normal here, minus 15 centimeters? Well, if you have cold water at depth, cold water contracts. If it contracts, it'll make a divot on the ocean surface. Also, if you have stronger than normal trades here, it's going to be scooping water out, pushing it this way. And also notice here, higher at 15, 20 centimeter, maybe 25 or more centimeters above normal here. All warm water we know is in the West Pacific, so it's putting upward pressure, it's expanding, making a bump on the ocean surface. And all the cold water that's displaced here by the trade winds is all balled up here, being held by a brick wall of nonstop easterly trades blowing into it. As soon as the trades relax, all this will swing and start like a tidal wave, swashing off to the east again. But we don't expect that to happen as long as La Nina is in play. Now here's where things get real interesting. Upper ocean heat anomalies. This is the West Pacific here. This is the East Pacific here. Reds are warmer than normal temperatures. Blues, colder than normal. Last November, December, colder than normal temperatures in the East Pacific. Typical La Nina pattern. Warm water all balled up in the west. This summer, well, as we got into spring, actually, March, April, May, 1 Kelvin wave. We actually got the active phase of the MJO pushed across. Trades were back down. We got a Kelvin wave. That is warm water pushing across the Pacific the whole way into Ecuador. A second Kelvin wave after that in the April timeframe. And yet a third one into June, and then it all just fell apart again. Trades picked up again as we got into July, and then colder than normal water at depth started developing. Upwelling Kelvin wave, they call it. That's a cold water Kelvin wave, but it doesn't really act like a Kelvin wave. It's just sort of locked in place. Now, the interesting part is, notice, it peaked out, and as of right now, it looks like it's starting to fade. This is pretty much what happened last year in the December time frame too, right? So, second year of this, it's starting to fade. This might set us up as we get into March for a building warm trend, but who knows what's going to happen at this point. We've never seen a 3-year La Nina, and we're not expecting it, but with La Nina being in play for 2 years, the entire atmosphere around upper atmosphere around the entire planet is very much been shaped by this La Nina configuration in the Pacific. And it's not just going to, if this cold water disappears, the upper atmosphere isn't just going to return to normal all of a sudden. It's going to take months, like 6 months, for things to settle back down to normal. So even if we get into like March, my guess it wouldn't be till next fall till we return to a somewhat normal pattern. All right, next, sea surface temperature anomalies. What's going on? Our waters, the blues are colder than normal waters. There is right here, South America, it's Chile, Peru, Central America, Baja, California, Hawaii right there. Date line's just about over here. Equator on 0. And you can see very cold waters building and developing right here south of California. We were hoping this was not going to happen. We were saying earlier this is a westward displaced La Nina where the coldest waters were out here. But there was that huge pool of colder than normal waters over in the East Pacific. We think what's happening now is that is starting to draw to the surface, and that giant pool of cold water is discharging. It discharges to the surface. You can see it in these pockets here. So it's a upwelling cold water Kelvin wave, and then that cold water, there's high pressure here. It rotates clockwise. It'll drive those cold waters east or west over towards the date line. Same thing, there's high pressure down in the southern Pacific Ocean. It rotates counterclockwise. It will also help push these colder than normal waters off to the east, but this is probably going to go on for a month or two. This cold water here, cold water supports high pressure south of, or this pattern sets up high pressure over California. This now makes us very much wonder how much precipitation California is going to see this winter. We got 42% of normal precipitation last winter. Looking at this right now, it seems like that's, somewhere in the 50% range. Just eyeballing it is maybe what we're going to see in California again this winter. The people are, water managers are taking drought very seriously, and it appears to be with good reason based on looking at what's happening with La Nina. I mean, not only just is it a 2-year La Nina, but it's a 2-year pretty strong one. And right as we're starting to move the peak of, the water season, rain season, late December, January, February, it seems like that's when all this subsurface cool pool is going to be discharging. That does not bode well for California. We had been hoping for a better situation a month ago, but now things not looking so good. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. South America, Peru, Central America, Hawaii, 0. The equator, dateline, 180 west, New Guinea there. The blues, colder than normal temperatures. Temperatures trending colder. In fact, earlier this week, it was much colder here. Again, that's suggesting that upwelling Kelvin wave, cold water Kelvin wave, starting to upwell to the surface, and more of that is just suggested as of right now. Notice slight warming along Chile and Peru for the moment, but it's really on the equator that matters, and there's nothing good in this picture other than shows a trend towards colder water. The backed off view here spells it quite clearly. A giant cold water the normal triangle from Ecuador down deep into Chile, the whole way out to the dateline and beyond, just locking things down. If it were El Nino, it'd be the exact opposite. All this would be warmer than normal water, and the cold water would be over here. But now, wherever the warm water is, that's where the precipitation is. So Australia, maritime continent, getting their share of precipitation while we sit high and dry over here. In fact, outgoing long wave radiation anomalies, that is, cloud cover in short, right now centered drier than normal here over the entire East Pacific to the dateline, wetter than normal over the maritime continent, but this is just the raw data. The anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, pretty much the same pattern, drier than normal over the dateline. That's actually better than this. It's just normal here off of Peru and Central America, which is kind of a good thing, but still wetter than normal over this area, so still indicative of a La Nina pattern. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nina 1.2 region. This is the area right there up along Ecuador and Peru in the far East Pacific. Temperatures steadily, so here is 0 degrees. So we've been below 0 for quite a while. It goes back since, I don't know, I'm going to say July. Steadily downward trend today, 1 degree and 431 thousandths of a degree below normal, almost a degree and a half. We were down below 1.5. I think we were at minus 1.6 degrees a couple of days ago. We've bounced back a little bit, but not particularly good. Either way, this is a pretty noisy area, and even with the noisy area, we've been negative. The official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 region, that's the area on the equator, south of California out to the dateline, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, minus 816 thousandths of a degree today. We were down about 1 degree, just a little bit more than that. What was that, about 2 or 3 weeks ago? But now, about 0.816 below normal. The official La Nina threshold is a half a degree below normal for effectively 5 consecutive months. We're well in that threshold since the end of September, so all of October and pretty much all of November. So we're 2 months into it. Officially, when you get 5 months, well, great, but by then winter's over, and you realize, yes, everything that I thought that La Nina was in control, yeah, you can put the official stamp on it, but I mean, it's pretty obvious where we're going. So we've talked about the MJO and what's going on sort of in the atmosphere from a cyclical perspective. We talked about down in the ocean subsurface temperatures. We've talked about ocean surface temperatures. What does the atmosphere above the ocean think is going on? Then we look at the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin. Tahiti is 140 west, so it's south of Hawaii, roughly, on the other side of the equator. Darwin, roughly over in the Indian Ocean. And so when pressure is higher in Tahiti than Darwin, you get a positive value. A month-long string of positives suggests the inactive phase of the MJO. When pressure's lower over Tahiti, well, that would be the active phase of the MJO moving over the West Pacific, and your readings would be negative. When you get months of above normal temperatures, like the 90-day average here, then that's clearly a sign of La Nina. Likewise, if you're negative for months on end, that typically suggests El Nino. So the daily contribution, positive. Just scanning down the numbers here, it's a long string of positives. Okay, suggesting probably at least the inactive phase of the MJO. 30-day average, positive at 6.16. And where's it been? Well, it was up at 11, so we're actually down lower than we were. We'll see where that goes as this cold water starts gurgling up to the surface in the East Pacific. I think that's going to drive this SOI value a lot higher. The 90-day average, your El Nino La Nina indicator, plus 9.43. Where has it been? Pretty much stable. Last year, I think this got as high as plus 15 or 16, something like that. So we're not at the all-time high, but for this La Nina from the version that happened last year. But I suspect we're going to be very close to that. In fact, let's go take a look at a graph here real quick. Here's the 30-day moving SOI. All right, this is, again, over time, when you're negative, that's El Nino. Here we were back in January 2019. A weak El Nino went on till we got to 2020, okay, last year. And all of a sudden, we started moving upward. The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO, dropping pressure. The upward spikes are the inactive phase, rising pressure. As we get more rising pressure and comparatively less dropping pressure, we ended up at plus 20. This is the 30-day average last January of this year. So that was, almost 12 months ago. And then as we got into the summer, pressure sort of crashed and we go, hey, all right, maybe we're returning to normal. But here you get the definitive sense that we're starting to climb again. Will we get as high as this? Don't know. This peaked out in January. We're only a month off from that. Maybe we'll get lucky and maybe not as strong, but seems like this big pocket of upwelling cold water could definitely change things rather dramatically and rather quickly. So finally, the forecast from the CFS version 2 model for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. All right, so where are we? We're in November, sometime here about -1 degree. And this model says temperatures dropping to 1.5 degrees. Now, was it 3 or 4 months ago, it said we were going to be down to -2 degrees. I think at one point it went down to 2.5 degrees. So a little bit more moderate here, but still 2 degrees below normal. That would beat whatever we did last year. Don't know that that's realistic. And then returning to normal in July. This is the more moderate version, the PDF corrected version, which is probably closer to reality. This says minus 1.4 degrees below normal, and that's probably about right. Again, here's where we are right now, just 0.8 of a degree below normal. We'd have to go Well, there's 1.5, so we'd have to be down here for almost a whole month to do what this chart says we're going to do, down to 1.4 degrees. So this is interesting. So the dilemma is, are the models correct? Is this a good value here? And the other thing to consider is this giant pool of cool water, subsurface in the East Pacific here, it's gurgling to the surface. And there it is again. You can see it's weakening. Where's that cold water going? It's heading up to the surface. Will it drive us down to, as we get into mid-January, down to 1.4 degrees below normal? Well, a little bit early to tell, but probably this is as good a guess as any. So that suggests, again, another La Nina type winter pattern. All right, so let's see if this works. We've had extreme problems with the camera this evening, so please bear with us. Might freeze, and then we'll just cut to black. Anyway, for right now, there is the active phase of the MJO trying to push into the Pacific, a series of small gales forecast for the Central Pacific over the next week and maybe a little bit beyond that. And the potential, there's actually a gale forming right now over the dateline, so swell seems likely. Nothing huge, but at least rideable surf. We'll take it after 2 weeks of it being extremely small. Anything is a gift at this point. Longer term outlook, well, La Nina for sure. It looks like it's happening this winter, and will continue to deepen as we go further into the winter. So make the most of whatever you can get right now. Beyond that, for sure, La Nina coming. And other than that, we're hoping for a better pattern as we get into next summer. That's a long-term forecast for sure. 6 months out. Take what you can get and hope for better later. All right, so that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. You can do so, ring the bell there, and you'll get automatic notifications when we post the video on YouTube. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. Go to stormsurf.com. All the data you saw this evening is available there. You can build your own forecast, practice your skills, and then compare the your forecast with our forecast a week from now. If you have any questions or concerns or whatever, send us a comment on our channel. We do our best to try to reply as soon as possible. And other than that, that's it for this week. So make the most of whatever swell is coming. Be safe. Go get some waves and have a good time. And happy Thanksgiving. We plan to do this again next week, same time, same channel on Sunday evening. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching.